Mouth Township, Ohio. Isaac, welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for attending today. Thank you so much for that introduction. And for those of you who don't really know the show too much, I have the distinctive honor of getting to talk about all the really high-tech, futuristic topics that everybody loves me to talk about that we won't get to build for centuries. In some cases, maybe 1 or 2 centuries. In other cases, possibly needing scientific notation for how many centuries it's going to be. So we get to cover a wide variety of topics from, of course, a favorite of this group, the O'Neill cylinder, to more advanced topics that we'll get to later on. Things that we often classify merely as a BWC megastructure, or things that we'd only build because we can, like a cube-shaped planet. So after about 8 years of doing this, we were told you what the original topic for the show was. It kind of got started as a bit of an accident because I had found that I kind of missed working in physics after I got out of physics in the Army. And so I was talking to a lot of science fiction writers, and they were trying to be more realistic about their settings. Say, how can we have something besides just the classic old cliche planet? So you're missing a whole range of these awesome, cool megastructures that would be a great setting for so much of your sci-fi. And they're a lot more realistic in so many ways. So I threw together a little PowerPoint, put a narration over top of it, put it up on YouTube, and later on I got this email from YouTube saying, you have a subscriber. And I said, what the heck is a subscriber? So, about 8 years and 700,000 subscribers later, 100 million views, and more on other platforms, we are here today. And I thought, what a great chance to kind of revisit that original topic of megastructures today. So I think in this case, most of my audience and most of you do know what a megastructure already is. They are a little bit hard to clearly define. They are not merely a thing in the future. But you obviously have seen them in the past. You could say the Great Wall of China is one. You could say that the pyramids are one. We say, well, we mean megastructures in space, but not entirely just megastructures in space. People can have on-planet ones today too. Now, how you actually classify megastructures is kind of tricky. There are so many different ways of doing it, but for today, just for today, we're going to be dividing them into habitation megastructures, power and energy megastructures, space travel megastructures, weapons and defense megastructures, astronomy and communication megastructures, and computation megastructures. However, my favorite of that is habitation megastructures. So while it is listed as first, it's the last one we're going to cover, so we have tons of time for it, and then we'll get to questions as we usually do on these live streams. So for those who don't know our format, usually we do a weekly episode on Thursdays, plus one science fiction-based episode once a month, but also once a month we do a live stream Q&A as opposed to our usual pre-recorded format. And one of the things I like about pre-recorded is I can use so much better visuals for it. And while it's always a risk with PowerPoint, I couldn't skip the chance today to show some of the really nice animations because there were so few animations for so many of these topics 8 years ago. And since then, I've got to work with so many animators that have managed to bring so many to visual life that we're going to be kind of looking at some of them as we go. But we're going to start with one that a lot of you already are familiar with. Power and energy megastructures, space-based solar power is one of the big topics for this conference today. Who here had a chance to go watch a couple of those talks on space-based solar? It's a topic that is either controversial or widely accepted as a great thing for the future. For my part, I usually say it's one of the 2 big kickstarting technologies that could really get us in space in a big way, either asteroid mining or we always love technology. By the year 2040, we will manage to still have twice as many audiovisual glitches as we do nowadays. So the usual idea, of course, is that you need these gigantic, thin solar panels or mirrors or shades, sometimes for direct power collection, sometimes for just shading a planet or adding light to it like we might do with Mars to warm it up. This whole range of power structures, power and energy, whether it's beaming energy down to Earth, whether it's putting light onto Mars, or whether it's being used to beam energy to places that are beyond what we say good solar locations, or even in the case of space travel to help push spaceships. So that's our next category is space travel-based ones. And you say, well, you got megastructures for space travel. Some of those are your power and energy-based ones that would help to push them. So it'll be your spaceports, your destinations. But the spaceships themselves will often count as a megastructure. Just to move that much ecology from one place to another is usually going to require a megastructure for habitation all by itself. Who here has heard of the book Rendezvous with RAMA? Hopefully everybody. Who here recently saw the new movie Dune? Yeah. Who here was really glad to know that the director of Dune is also the one who's going to be directing the new Rendezvous with Rama film. Yeah. So hopefully very good visuals for that because it'll be a hard one to do. So we have big ships like that we could be sending out into space, giant cylinder habitats that people could live on for generations, generation ships or arc ships. And of course, we also have the ability to push ships using the power and energy megastructures we just looked at, either using beamed energy, maybe direct lasers, or just sending them power so they can shoot photons, or not photons, shoot various particles out the back that have been accelerated by that energy. The ability to break the rocket equation, or at least bend it a little bit, by sending in your power, energy, or even your propellant from far away, lets you actually potentially do spaceships that might get to other star systems in less than centuries. So that is one of our examples of what we want megastructures for, sending power around. On screen at the moment, we have the Niko Dyson beam. That's always a favorite. It's a little bit big for what you would usually need. Typically, you use a Niko Dyson beam, which is a collection of panels around a star to send a beam of energy at some location. That would be kind of a Death Star effect. It would blow a planet up if you use the entire solar output of a star. But you could push a very big spaceship with that, or you could potentially push a star system with that, or you could use much smaller ones, or star lasers, corona-based mirrors, to push more modest spaceships up to real fractions of the speed of light. In that kind of context, your problems become, how do I slow down? And how fast can I go without ramming into things? Because you can break away from the rocket equation from having energy focused from far away. You're just not bound to it in the same way. It becomes as good a fuel as antimatter. So now, next category of megastructures, coming off the topic of gigantic beam and energies that can blow up planets, are weapons and defense. You could have some very, very big weapons, and you probably would need them for those kind of combats that you might have going on between star systems. And of course, we're not necessarily going to love the idea of having giant weapons in space, but they're probably going to become a reality. So you probably want to have defenses that could handle that as well. And so we look at the future and we say we want mostly to have peaceful uses of science, peaceful uses of technology, but we shouldn't fall ourselves into thinking there won't be some pretty big weapons out there. And of course, that's another attractive way to help develop space is you've got potentially the energy sector, trillions of dollars of economy there, potentially communications, but defense is a big one too. It's been one of the ones pushing it from the get-go. We should expect to see that still playing a role. So weapons defense is another one of our types of megastructure. Often one of the cooler ones, but at the same time, not necessarily my favorite, one we're going to move through fairly quickly today, right? And then our next example will be astronomy and communication megastructures. What is the biggest telescope right now? Does anyone know off the top of their head what the largest telescope is? Optical, I think maybe it's the binocular array or 10 meters. Got some other bigger ones up in space. And you got the very large array. We want to be able to put giant spaceships up there, giant telescopes up there, because there's no gravity there. There's no wind to deform your lenses, so you can build really huge. If you actually have the ability to build up real big moon bases, you can build parabolic telescopes on the moon, spinning liquid metal ones that can let you build giant zenith or azimuth telescopes to see very, very far away. The dark side of the moon may be very handy for that purpose. On top of that, we also have the ability to just do very large arrays of mirrors, very large collections of them, very large parallax, not just Earth's orbit, but potentially ones that are built out in the Oort cloud to connect to each other and just give you that huge parallax. With things like that, you might actually be able to lens a planet like we can our solar system, even though it's hundreds of light years away. It's huge, it's big. That's our topic for today, is not to feel like these ideas that we can do right now, that we have these limitations on mass, are going to stay there forever. When you have industry in space, when you have whole settlements up in space, the entire dynamic changes. You have the ability to just build things so enormously huge that we wouldn't expect them. There's around 1 trillion solar systems in this galaxy. Well, half that maybe. Trillions of planets. What if each one of them had a Hubble telescope-sized thing that was just devoted to it? Seems ridiculous, but if you're dealing with a Dyson swarm or a Kardashev-scale civilization, that's what you might actually have. In a civilization where you have billions upon billions of people living in space, then in that solar system alone, you might have 1 trillion astronomers. How many astronomers are in the United States right now? Maybe 1,000? That's probably pretty close to 1 million people, if not more, that are astronomers. If there's a billion, that means you have 1 trillion astronomers. You actually have the ability to potentially build these giant telescopes that could look at each individual star in the galaxy constantly, one just devoted to that. And so we don't want to assume that. One moment. Always a gamble to put visuals inside your PowerPoints, especially videos. Technology hates you. It's like space. Everything about technology and presentations, much like space, is designed to kill you. So one of the things I love about the show is I get to work with these really awesome animators. Jeremy Joswick did this one so often, and it's the allure I have to bring them in. I say, this has never, ever, ever been animated before. This will be the first thing you ever get to look at. Who here has seen the High Frontiers book with Charles K. O'Neill? I hope almost everybody, right? It's the classic. It's the one we grew up listening, watching, looking at, right? The O'Neill cylinder is that visual display, and we all think of that great art by Don S. Davis. And so for our animators, they are the ones who are getting to do so many of those first things that are going to inspire future generations. So that's why I lure them in to help on the show. So, all right, so astronomy, always a big one. SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which has a second component. We don't just use giant telescopes to find alien civilizations. We also hope that they've been building giant things themselves, and we go looking for that. Dysonian SETI or other megastructural-based searches for extraterrestrials. That's one of the options there. You build bigger telescopes, and you hope they also build big ones too. But then we say, what else can we do with that? Well, if you try to look through signals, try to look through data, you can build some really big computers. Who here is... We use the telescopes to try to get the answers to things like life, the universe, and everything, right? Does everybody know what the answer to life, the universe, and everything is? 4042, right? So we have in that story a city-sized computer called Deep Thought that comes up with that answer, and the advice it gives to its creators after it gives them that answer is, build me a bigger computer. Build me a planet-sized computer. Build me a planet mind. They say, well, we go even bigger than that with megastructures. A planet-sized computer is big, but you can go ahead and create what we call a Matryoshka brain, which is an example of a Dyson sphere. Now, the name comes from the classic nested dolls of the Matryoshka dolls from Russia. But the idea is that each additional layer of it is going to be giving off raised heat. It's just layer to layer of solar panel and computer. Each layer is absorbed by the next layer, one step down, until you have gotten down to deep space where it's even more efficient computation because it's freezing cold, and you can do so much calculation with that. I think we worked out one time that if it does turn out that you need about 10 to 16 flops to emulate human mind at real speed, that you could do something like 10 to 30 humans simultaneously on just one G-dwarf Matryoshka brain. That's a lot. That is more than you could fit on every planet in the known universe if you terraformed it like we have now. Right? That is a lot of people. It might turn out to be less than that, but that'd still be a lot. And what's cool, there are a lot more stars in our galaxy. So there is so much you can do with these, and many do feel that eventually the most common thing you'll see in this galaxy, or not see because everything will be concluded by them, would be Matryoshka brains and other Dyson-type megastructures swarming around these stars, sucking up every wasted photon to just do calculation. I don't know what you answer with that. Presumably you try to find out what the question was, that the answer is 42.2, but you just find whatever answers you're looking for, or you emulate people. So those are all classic ones. And say, if you don't like emulating people, what you go ahead and do is you move on to my favorite one, which is build more living space for them. There was a presentation by our winning student team, and I love the student presentations just at this poster. So you guys all have a chance to see those? Yeah. The Magma one, where they actually walk through how much raw materials there were in the solar system's asteroid belt and how many people that would support if you had perfect recycling usage. And I believe they came up with 1 million billion. I've heard the figure 10 quadrillion a lot too, which is a little bit less than that. That's a lot of people, right? That's a lot of people. And that's just the asteroid belt. The asteroid belt weighs less to the moon than the moon weighs to Earth. And there's 1,000 times more metals in the sun we could potentially extract too with some megastructures via what we call star lifting to build more of these things. So we say, I love building new places for people to live because I can maybe put 10 times as many people on classic planets in our solar system. Mars, Venus. Venus is very, very terraformable. Mercury, maybe even too, if you get enough solar shades in front of it. 10 times as many people on it. But if I'm not using planets for habitation, if I'm instead using giant megastructures, you can start fitting in a lot more of them. However, it's not just for building potential fake planets. We have a lot of examples of habitation megastructures. And I believe we had somebody want to talk about some of the other fun stuff the National Space Site did before I launched into that discussion. So we will take a quick pause real quick before we jump into the habitation megastructures to introduce David Dressler, the Director of Information Services for the National Space Society. And I will just let him take my seat real quick to make that easier.
Thank you, Isaac. This is a real honor having you here at ISDC. It's been quite an eventful conference overall, but this is like the pièce de résistance, having live streaming to this huge audience. There's many YouTube streamers, but Isaac is the one that's really forward-looking, and National Space Society embraces that because we're all about getting people off planet, living in the solar system or throughout the universe. And Isaac's, the vision he shares dovetails nicely with what our organization's all about. What we need, though, as a society is more membership. Right now, we currently have about 6,000 members. And you consider how many people watch science fiction, how many people watch YouTube streaming, and their subscribers, the numbers are through the roof. So how can we function as a society and embrace these groups and bring them in and increase our numbers as well? We can bring more YouTubers to this event. In fact, I've been in contact with many of them, and they are interested, but it's all about funding. And really, we need funding as an organization to take things to the next level. And, you know, it's like here you get to meet the scientists, the engineers, the astronauts. Coming to this event is really quite spectacular. We had a panel yesterday morning that Dennis Stone from NASA, the commercial operations manager, basically bringing in companies like SpaceX and Boeing, Axiom, that are actually building the next level space habitats for low Earth orbit. I hope in about 2 or 3 years, we're talking to companies that are building structures on the moon. And where do we go from there? Well, Mars, out to the gas giant planets and their moons. It's pretty much endless as far as how far we can go. So help us as an organization. Go to nss.org, actually space.nss.org, and check out our website, check out our blog, and consider joining us. We'd really love to have you all out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dave. And one thing as we get back into this, the talk that I was planning to give on this, I originally even thinking about giving it back in 2020 when I'd received the Pioneer Award, and I couldn't come in person to give that presentation because of COVID. We all love COVID. This is the third time I've had a chance to speak to a live audience since COVID came out, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity. It is definitely a different experience to be able to do it, you know, as opposed to having to do everything live stream or via Zoom. So, we found the topic just kind of going through as a subject, saying, I want to talk more about this, but there was no way at all that we're going to get through every last megastructure. There are 70 slides in this. This makes a very long talk. So I decided I need to do another episode for it. And I've always been asked, can I redo that original episode to cover these topics in more detail? So I said, why not? So on June 9th, we're releasing the whole megastructural compendium, as people had asked for. It's going to cover every one we could come up with. There were 100 megastructures. It is 2 hours long, and it is pre-recorded, so we moved at a pace. And actually, it was so long, I had to get my wife, Sarah, to help me narrate it. So the first time we've had a co-narrated episode. All those times we've had a chance to work with some other YouTubers. And speaking of that, you should definitely get on some of our sister channels like John Michael Gautier or Event Horizon or Universe Day, and encourage them to maybe do this with NSS as well, because it is a great experience and a great chance for people to interact more with it. So everyone who's channel regular knows I love megastructures that we use for more space to live in. And they are not just in space. So we're going to be going through some categories. I want to start with the ones that aren't in space for us. We'll start with the onward ones. We'll go through to our space-based ones. Then we'll even get to our artificial planet scale ones. And then we'll go to the really interesting ones that make planets very tiny. There are a lot of those, and I love them. So with no further ado, what exactly is it that makes these things so awesome? Planets versus megastructures. Obviously, only for us the habitation-based megastructures. You can use them for terraforming, like on Mars, like a big solar shade. But why would we say the future of humanity is on megastructures, not planets? I mean, don't say to exclusion. There'll be people living on Earth for a long time to go. probably they'll end up turning Earth into a bit of a megastructure itself. And the biggest advantage you have, there are all sorts of pros and all sorts of cons, and there's a lot of perceived cons. I want to walk through those real quick before we get into those host of them. What are the known pros? First, Mars. It takes a lot of effort to make Mars livable, right? And making it livable does not mean it's anything like Earth-like. There are very few ways you can make the gravity higher there. With things like rotational spin gravity, you can make it exactly whatever you want. That might not always be Earth-like conditions. We're not limited to Earth-like conditions. We also want alien worlds to live on. You want to go to a resort where it's only a seventh of gravity. But in a megastructure, it's the difference between a cave and a house. You get to build the thing to whatever your specifications are, not what you find. And the other difference is that, much like a cave versus a house, it uses a lot less material. You know, you're thinking about a mountain that's got maybe a dozen caves in it. That thing weighs a few gigatons. How many houses can you build out of a few gigatons of stone? How many skyscrapers can you build out of that much? You know, it's kind of the same concept of the megastructure. Underneath our feet is 4,000 miles of mostly hot magma, radioactive molten metal, and other dangerous things that we don't really need to use much. They're important to our world, but you can get around a lot of them. You know, you can use that more efficiently. I don't know how thick the ideal habitation megastructure would be. Maybe it's a couple of meters of earth and soil. Maybe it's a kilometer, but you can get much more efficient, a millionfold. So you can build 1,000,000 times the living area out of the same material. And you got the sunlight for it. Earth only uses about 1/2 billionth of the sunlight that we get off of the sun. And all the other planets combined, maybe 100 million tops. All the rest of those photons go out in space and are forever wasted. Most of them will never, ever even run into a mote of dust in the rest of the time the universe around. It's a very long time. A lot of empty space. The other thing, of course, is since there is a lot of empty space, you can build a megastructure wherever you want. You're not just limited to where the planets happen to be aligned at. You can move a planet. We'll talk about how you can move a planet. You can change the rotational rate. You can even change the gravity, but it takes a lot of work. Right? The megastructures, you can place them where you want. You can place them inside that asteroid that's a very nice place to live, and you want gravity. Right? You're going to mine the thing out, right? But you want to have a place to live. And here's the other big one. They're mobile. How many of our conflicts come from the fact that neighboring countries or even neighboring towns are next to each other forever? They have to deal with each other. There's sometimes advantages to the fact that you have to have a relationship, like sticking two kids in a room to, work it out. A lot of times that doesn't work out too well, right? And we have a whole array of megastructures that are just devoted to blowing stuff up that we probably don't want to see get used to handle those kind of conflicts. Every one of these kind of megastructures, they're not ideal spaceships in most cases, but they are a spaceship. You can move them. You can move your community. And O'Neill cylinder is like the size of the typical American county. That's a nice little subdivision. Maybe it's the size of a nation. Maybe it decides, hey, we're the county of O'Neill in the state of, I don't know where he was from, let's say Oklahoma. And we decided we don't want to be in Oklahoma anymore. We're going to be a part of Texas or Alabama. Or we decided to be a part of Switzerland. Or we decided to be our own sovereign nation. They can move. That's a big advantage to megastructures. They don't have to keep the same neighbors. The questions that come up as the cons, of course, is cost. You're going to build a planet. That cannot possibly be cheap. There's nothing cheap about building a planet. But you're actually not building a planet, right? You're building just what you need at the time. That's a nice feature. You build what you need at the time. How much is the cost of all the housing in the United States? When people first came here or decided to colonize this or that part of the world, they didn't start by building every last house and road. They built as they needed. One of our problems with terraforming is that you kind of have to do it all at once. You don't get as much modularity. You can paraterraform, build your domes, your habitats underneath that, but they're really kind of megastructures themselves, and that's one of our categories we're going to get to in just a moment, are those onboard megastructures. So you're building a dome, you're building a floor, you're building everything you need there. What really is the difference between a Martian dome and a O'Neill cylinder orbit around Mars? Easy access to materials, basically, to build stuff out of. That's not really a reason to live on planets, because you got to deal with all that gravity, right? So the other question, of course, is you have to maintain it. But you have to maintain planets too, right? We are learning that. Our ancestors already knew that. They had all those canals and farms to maintain. They got that. We're getting that again. Planets are hard to maintain. Ecologies are hard to maintain, and they have to be maintained. A planet is not just something you let to sit there forever. They are not permanent. They are not static. And that, of course, when you've terraformed, is even less static. Who here thinks that Mars is going to stay terraformed and we just got done and left it that way? Probably not, right? Okay. So Then there's the other question that say is safety. People are a little bit worried, if I live inside a big tin can, I'm not going to die. And I say, well, how thick is it? What's protecting you right now from an asteroid hitting us? Thin air, right? It's actually a surprisingly good shield, but still, all the protective door, that wonderful metal, is beneath us. It doesn't really protect us very much from anything other than the planet itself, which is a big radioactive ball of molten metal, not necessarily the safest place in the world. In most of these mega structures, not only would you have the floor underneath you spinning around, but you also have all that additional shielding. So I would say they're pretty safe too. You build a superstructure around one as thick as you want, full of gas, and it's over your head too. It's protecting you. So that again is mostly for orbital ones, but we also have all those ground-based ones. I don't want to just get in the habit of thinking of these things only as in space. We already have a lot of megastructures. And one of the reasons why we're looking at building them more here on Earth is because they have ways of meeting needs we need, right, here on Earth. What do we need? Living space. We're going to need more living space. Every city grows upward instead of just outward because they got location, location, location. For every space habitat we build on a distant world, we're going to build another one in orbit of Earth, and we're going to build more down here on Earth. Even when there's 1 trillion people, I guess most of them will live near Earth. Maybe in low orbits, maybe in megastructure. So, of course, we need a living space, and we need what? In addition to we need living space, we're going to need to have places people want to live. Classic science fiction is full of concrete and steel wastelands of cities. You don't want to live there. You don't want to eat Soylent Green. Maybe you want to eat Soylent Green. Most of us don't want to eat Soylent Green. But this is a false image. We see as we get, even nowadays, so much greener, so much more options for having pretty cities, potentially even parks inside of cities. So we get the ecology, architecture that's based on ecology. And one of the things that also helps us to answer isn't just the need for people to have an actual ecosystem that's not just, a jungle of concrete and steel around them, but plants. And of course, we like to eat them too. So our megastructures can potentially serve that role. They can be your living space, your growing space, and we have paradigms that can change. If power gets way cheaper, suddenly having controlled greenhouse-like environments where you have the temperature, the atmosphere, the humidity, all of them controlled specifically, those are vastly more productive, right? They are way more productive. They're really expensive to build, and you have to power them, right? However, that expense is entirely based off of what? Automation. If I can build 1 million self-replicating power collectors and robots to build them, then I can build towers for greenhouses the same way, and I can power them. Maybe get cheap fusion, who knows? The idea if you have abundant power and good automation, which it seems like we're moving to, I hope, because if we don't get those, we'll probably be in a lot more trouble. If we get them, though, the paradigm shifts. Suddenly you can start having giant towers that grow food, right? Suddenly you don't have to say all of our arable land and all of our forests all have to be knocked over for more cities. Everything gets crushed in the face of that concrete and steel thing because now you just don't need that many people. Your real limitation on space becomes getting rid of heat, right? That becomes the new paradigm. And that's your real limitation at that point is getting rid of heat. And you do not ever actually max the planet out to that point. You never get to New York City levels of density planet-wide before you just can't get rid of your heat anyway. So you don't actually have to have those horrible concrete wastelands that we see in sci-fi unless you really want to. Some people want to run around with mutant cannibals, right? That might be interesting. But what we find is that those are good examples of closed ecosystem, right? All ecologies, all architecture based on ecology is to some degree closed. Because it's to some degree closed, never 100% closed. It needs an energy input, for instance, might need raw materials, might need workers. These are the same on Earth then as they are on other worlds or in space. All of your effort goes towards trying to make a habitat that can exist almost anywhere and an ecology that functions for it there, a community that functions there. And it's just the idea that the human community of that closed habitat, be it an ecology, a space station, a floating island city, is as self-contained as you can reasonably get it, not because you don't want trade or exchange of ideas, but because it's more efficient to be able to be as self-sufficient as you can be. And that, of course, sets us up well for space where we have no choice to be as self-sufficient as we can be because it's hard to import stuff from Earth to Mars, and it's even harder to do to Alpha Centauri. So we have to become masters of the closed environment. There are other megastructures you can have on a planet, though, and one of my favorite ones are the ones that help us get off the planet. I love SpaceX. I always feel bad because they were one of my bad predictions. I thought they were going to fail. I thought, like everything else, I thought we were going to have that just collapse. All of us who kind of grew up in the 80s and the 90s where we only saw the Apollo landings on MTV, we remember just kind of getting that one after another of, we'll be back to the moon by then. And all those kind of, like, hard to stay optimistic doing all of that. Right? Then we get these launches, and they worked. Before that, though, I was saying, well, you're not going to get the rockets to actually work that one. I still think there's a limit what you can really do with chemistry, right? If you really want to send tons and tons, megatons of people up to space every day, megatons of cargo back and forth every day, it does help to utilize some of the megastructures that have the option to actually carry us directly into space. My personal favorite is the orbital ring, but a lot of folks are very fond of the Lofstrom loop, or of course the space tower or space elevator. A lot of options become way more powerful if you have vast amounts of power, active support. Who here is familiar with the Lofstrom loop as an idea? It's a pretty popular one. Run a lot of energy through metal, run very fast metal through a system, holds itself aloft, and you can magnetically propel yourself out like a train right to space. I love the idea of a train to space. Space elevators, you can run 1 or 2 cars straight up the thing and you need super materials. With active support, which really would help if you had magnetically shielding materials that we have now and superconductors, you could potentially send megatons of cargo to space every day for $1 a kilogram or something like that. Some absurdly low, tiny number. Most becomes a maintenance thing. That is when you really start getting to have that sci-fi future we all really want, which isn't to see astronauts on the moon, but to be able to go there to see the Disneyland park there, to actually go look at that giant parabolic, dark side of the moon telescope that's a mile across. That's what we really want in the long term. If we really want to be able to plant people in space and not just a small seed that will grow, but where you can actually allow people to really migrate without having to be the cream of the crop, but just regular Joes moving there, you need things like launch assist systems because chemical rockets probably won't do it. Maybe I'll be wrong about that one. I don't mind being proven wrong, and I have been proven wrong by SpaceX before. But to me, that's where you start. Eventually, you move on to these launch assist systems to get you into space and into orbit. And of course, that takes us to orbital habitats. Nothing new to anybody here. What we got up on the screen right now is another one of our favorite animations by Udo Schroeder, another one of our channel animators. This is the assembly of an O'Neill cylinder. Everybody here knows the O'Neill cylinder. There are some other ones we love to talk about on the show, like the McKendree cylinder or the Bishop ring. They're the big brothers, those you can potentially build with graphene. Right? I love O'Neill cylinders. We have 4 or 5 episodes just devoted to those. Like, we have what's called Life on Board O'Neill cylinder. And what you find when you look into the topic more and more, and this holds true for Stanford Tauruses and other ones too, but what you find more and more is it becomes about layers of ecology. Everything inside one of those becomes the idea that you have an ecosystem, a technological ecosystem, a cyber ecosystem. You actually have to start working towards tailoring everything to that. And one of the things I love about that is it means each one of these things is its own unique planet. I didn't say, well, I'm worried these things will be repetitive. They're kind of boring. You say the sci-fi writers run around about these things. It's all like the suburbs in space. Is an O'Neill cylinder just a suburb in space? It's just like Earth. And I think every one of them would be really unique in its own way and would have to grow more so with time. So even though you can do all sorts of things these to have alien environments, things you could never ever find on the planets, right? The most alien things you're ever going to build are going to be things you build, not just find. But you have so much room for variation just inside these. One of the things I love about orbital habitats is that they make an option for nature preserves. We often talk about moving humanity off Earth to save Earth and be able to use it again for the ecosystem. In some ways, it's probably a lot easier to go ahead and build O'Neill cylinders and put ecosystems in them, especially because that protects them not just from people. It's really hard to have people just wandering into an O'Neill cylinder without permission, right? There's a short way, number of ways to get in. But you also protect them from their fellow ecosystems. You get the invasive species thing that is, it's natural, but it's regular. And of course, it happens a lot faster with us around because we tend to transport in organisms without their natural predators, prey, and so forth there. So I like O'Neill cylinders as an option for ecosystems too, and other habitats too. Here we've got a Stanford Taurus, same one. Stanford Taurus is always your best one to start off with because it focuses on, we need a certain number of rotations per minute to actually keep people comfortable with gravity without vomiting. So you'll see a lot more of those. And people sometimes say they're smaller, they're less mass efficient. So we see more O'Neill cylinders. I'm not so sure about that because we love the O'Neill cylinder for how big it is. We love the McKendree cylinder for how much bigger it is. but in many ways, the smaller ones are nice. You see, you got the smaller spaceship here. Now we've got a McHenry cylinder to scale. At least we'll get to scale in a moment when we see Neptune in the background. So these are continent-class habitats. I love them. They're huge. You can fit billions of people inside one, even if they're single layer. They are awesome. But a lot of times what you're really going to see is a lot more of the smaller ones. Everybody here has seen Brian Versteeg's art. He is amazing. I love getting to work with him. He has loaned us quite a lot of his art for the channel. And this is the inside of the Capana station. And it, of course, is only designed for maybe a few hundred people. But which is likely to be more common? Are there more villages or cities? Even in a civilization that can build McHenry cylinders or even bigger things like a Niven Ringward, you're still going to have a lot of people who just want the smaller one for themselves. Now, I think we're probably running low on time. Was that the... Yep. So we're going to start moving forward much faster. Asteroid mines. We want to be able to carve out all that wonderful space gold. But people, they are going to need to have lives of their own at some point in time. We want to move out there and have a community. What is San Francisco best known for right now? It's not the gold rush. There's not, 3 or 4 million people in San Francisco mining gold. Those mines, they become the basis for people to live in. They become the way that people fund themselves. They become the shielding that protects them. You just carve the cylinder right into it. You put a protective shell around it. You don't actually rotate the asteroid or fall apart. But it becomes your economy, your protection, your location, your civilization. You can go some very big ones that way. So deep space habitats are pretty much the same idea. You say, what is in deep space that you could live off of? There's no sunlight. Well, maybe you got fusion, right? There's actually a lot of economic opportunities even beyond the Kuiper belt. All those gigantic telescopes we want to build, all those energy relay pushing systems that might create laser highways between stars. Those things would presumably have people that lived on them, unless you really trust your artificial intelligence, which maybe you do, maybe you don't. Your ultra secure science labs, that place where you keep your antimatter stored at, if you get that working, because you don't keep that anywhere near a planet, at least not a planet you like. So deep space habitats, another place people might live. You got a lot of space. And of course, the interstellar ships themselves, those are, again, all megastructures. You have to move an ecology and say, if I got self-replicating machines, I was heard of von Neumann's machines. You go launch the thing over there, and it creates a whole bunch of itself, and they spit out and do the same. Well, if it's a self-replicating machine, why launch it during the solar system when you can launch it at an unused asteroid and say, build me an O'Neill cylinder? Say, now put an engine on the back of that. So instead of just sending one small probe to another solar system, you send one small probe to an asteroid and say, build yourself and infect all the other asteroids and make me giant Arc ships. And you're getting fuel up off of Jupiter. It's got a lot of fuel. Or whatever we're using as power source, the sun pushing it. And you send those giant Arc ships, those giant civilizations, communities all by themselves off the stars. And those are your megastructures. And you might find when people get there, they like living on board those more than they like some planet that's going to take them thousands of years to colonize. And one difference you have with space travel in the future is you do your space infrastructure before you do your planet in other systems. You set that up first, perhaps. But of course, everyone still loves planets. I'm going to skip through the generation ship, I'm afraid, because we are time limited. Giant artificial planets. One thing I love about active support, if you have a lot of energy, if you have just vast amounts of energy and automation, you can just build a planet. If you can make artificial black holes, just stretch, you can make them any size you feel like, because it's arbitrarily mass then. Your mass scales evenly with your surface area if you want the same gravity. You want a planet 10 times bigger, it needs 10 times the surface area, it needs 10 times the mass for the same gravity. Black holes are nice for that, or you could just fill up a giant shell full of orbital rings with gas. You can build them around Saturn. You could wrap Saturn orbital rings, plate it over, and as a result of that, you could build a planetary surface there. Put other mirrors up in place to light up more. Now Saturn's a livable ecosystem. A lot of work to do that, obviously, but I'm not really sure it's that much more than terraforming a normal-sized planet would be. You build your rings around them, you do a vast energy power source, because, of course, this is not something we're building anytime too soon. And then you cover it over, and then you dump earth and sand and water on it, and you got a planet. Probably not quite that easy, but you get there. And I don't think that at that point in time it's really any different than trying to terraform a planet. They could be big or small. I don't know how small you could really build one, but if you're willing to put a glass sphere around to contain the atmosphere, you could probably have one that was the size of that little Rick and Morty planet where they accidentally crashed their van into it because it's only about the size of a football field. Or you could build one that is 1,000,000 times bigger than Earth. Right? We don't know if we could ever actually make artificial black holes, but we can find some. If you have what, a million times the mass of the sun, of the Earth in a black hole, a small one, that gives you a million times the surface area if you put something around it. What are you powering off of? Well, you're dumping material down there and you're running off the radiation coming off the accretion disk. You might find that those become the most popular places for people to live in the future, as they just go ahead and build giant big structures around black holes, which have all sorts of other uses for interstellar black hole highways and things along those lines. We get to ring worlds. You can actually build a ring world without a super tensile material by active support again. You put a second bigger ring behind it that doesn't spin that much, and all it is mass plus a magnetic field for it to push against. It replaces clumsily, but it gets the job done, what we see from Script with things like Larry Niven's ring world. It's a bit of a push, and I don't know why you'd ever build it, but that's one of those questions we get to, is why would you ever build these things? Some, though, you don't have to really have high technology with. We have one that's called a rung world. It's basically a bunch of O'Neill cylinders or McHenry cylinders connected by a tether that rotate around a star just like a ring world does, but the gravity is done by their own rotation themselves. They don't have to be made out of anything strong at all, just steel or graphene. They become great, and I love them because we could build them and you could go along with tethers and you still get that ring world size. And of course, you can push that all the way up to the point that you're enclosing a whole star, just like you can with ring worlds, so that you get a Dyson shell, if we can get the graphics to comply. One of the things I love about Dyson spheres is they're completely impossible to build. And you can build one, especially if you have something like artificial gravity. You can just build a statite shell around one as well. I think we might have just frozen our presentation. But with rung worlds or ring worlds, you can place them at angles around the star to absorb all the sunlight, and therefore you're not actually stuck using whatever super materials you're never going to find out and invent. Rung worlds don't have to be made of super strong materials either. That allows you to actually have contiguous communities all around an orbital path around a star, and that forms up into maybe your supernation of the future. A rung world that has maybe 1% of the sun's light being eclipsed on it, and there's a couple hundred of those. That might be the future of humanity in this solar system, is a Dyson swarm or Dyson shell made of rung worlds or ring worlds that just are home to billions upon billions of people. And that just lets you do billions upon billions of tasks we can't do now. So I do think we did get frozen there, so we can't show you the Birch planet. But I will just describe it real quick. If you're building big black hole-based megastructures, one of the ones you have as an option is to build it around a galactic central mass black hole. And those give you options like, instead of just a Dyson swarm, you have something that had home to, well, trillions upon trillions of people, because it would have a surface area bigger than the entire number of planets in the entire universe. They get to be very big. Millions of times the mass of our sun means millions of times the surface area of Earth. That could be your largest megastructure people could live on. Is it possible? Under known physics, yes. Actually getting there might be a little bit harder. And so I think on that, yep, we're going to have to skip forward. So I think we're going to skip all our cube-shaped planets and ring-shaped planets and hoop-shaped planets and recommend those episodes to you. And now we're going to go ahead and move on to questions.
You can play in the background if you
Yeah, if we can. I love technology, it always freezes.
Questions from the audience here?
Hi, nice presentation.
Thank you.
If you have a habitat for trillions of people, have you ever considered what it might take to keep trillions of people organized in a functional society?
One of my favorite episodes to do was the future of governments. And then that one, we list off every known type of government we could think of. Because somebody asked me, what do you think the future of human government civilization would be? I said, it's going to be all of the above. And we just wrote a list that went on for like 3 minutes long of every listed type of government. One nice thing about post-scarcity civilizations, too, is you can get away with a lot of systems of government that might not be as functional just because you have so much resources. And because everyone's mobile, they can potentially move to communities they like better. Nonetheless, how do you actually administrate to 1 trillion people? I don't know that you do. You know, we always talk about these galactic empires, and I always use that kind of a meta sense. Even if you manage to get around the speed of light is an issue, which I don't think we ever will, I don't think you ever would have a unified galactic empire. I don't think you even have a unified solar empire. I think you'd instead have just billions upon millions of communities, and given that they could each still be billions strong, you know, that's a lot of people to handle.
Hi, Isaac.
Hi, Logan.
So obviously, there's going to be mega structures built by all sorts of different people and corporations and governments.
I hope so.
But in your opinion, for the first habitable mega structure, who's going to build the first one? Would it be a corporation or a government or what?
I mean, I guess we could go back to the idea that we've already had them built in the past too. Trying to figure out what exactly motivates people to build them. It's going to depend a lot on what breaks first on getting into space. If we get space-based solar panel, probably that. I mean, that could be entirely modular, small ones. I could see that happening. Alternatively, it might be an asteroid mine. Then they decide that they've got all that space core. They're going to build themselves a giant space habitat, Bezos 1 or whatever it be. It's going to be something that has economic sense, though. If you have a neocylinder built for 1 million people, it's not because there's only 1 million people living in space. There's probably tens of millions already up there before one gets commissioned. Scalable,
Hi, Isaac. I'd come up with an idea a while back, and I wasn't sure if it was something that was already in the literature or whatever, but the idea was you have your home world. If you had a shell of starships moving at relativistic speed, expanding away from that world,
Mhm.
and they're all artificial intelligence, and they're using quantum entanglement so that signals can go across the entire thing, it would be interesting from a standpoint of if you're on the edge of that and you're observing things and you want something computed really fast from your perspective, you would send the signal back to the home world where it's relativistic speeds are not applying, and it would almost be instantaneous once you were out in the shell, even though it might take 10 years to compute.
I'm not going to say that wouldn't work, but again, I'm a real
I'm just wondering
pessimist
if
on
it-
quantum
if
entanglement
it-
stuff
if it-
we use
I'm
for that.
wondering if that's already in the literature somewhere or if it was original to me.
A lot of people have written about using quantum entanglement as FTL. I tend to be very skeptical about it ever being used that way.
Not faster than light, I mean, in terms of just communications.
All right.
Of just creating a civilization where the outer shell of something is moving at relativistic speeds and the core is moving at normal speed, and they're using that as sort of a.
I don't think
force
you'd actually have
multiplier.
a contiguous civilization even there, just because they're spreading out so fast. If they're calling home for communications, they're going to localize a lot, I think, there too. If you're splitting out from Ethiopia, you don't really send a message home to Ethiopia before you cross the land bridge. It's too complicated for you to do it, even though they're moving pretty fast. So,
What ideas from this conference have you seen the most intriguing, and are you most interested in making new episodes about?
that's actually a great question because I have a little list of them I've been writing up. I'm going to do as a poll for the YouTube audience. Probably not till Monday though, just so I have a chance to go through them. The ones that I saw today are always the ones most on my mind, so I want to make sure I'm doing them fair. I just got done with Logan's presentation for there. It's sponsored to do an episode. They were kind of probably. I was thinking about staying sane in space. That's a tempting one to do. Mars is always a tempting topic to do. I think I really do need to redo. We did a look at power satellites years ago, but I feel like that topic needs updated a lot. I think space-based solar is what I'll almost certainly want to do again too. But I think I'll probably just go back through the entire syllabus list of them and just start picking which ones I want to try. So.
Yeah, the information that Jim Green shared today during lunch,
Yeah,
that was a real eye-opener about what Mars is about with a liquid core. And
We had just done an episode on making a magnetosphere for Mars a couple months ago, as well as nuking Mars for terraform it. So mostly why that wasn't a good idea, but still to do it. And I could never. Mars is just such a fun topic. There's so much. There's always something new every year too.
Thank you, Isaac Arthur, for presenting this. Space megastructures. This idea is amazingly mind expanding, but intuitively, I think structures are portrayed as being crushed or too unwieldy. Has anybody ever thought of having substructures connected electromagnetically in space?
I think, and that is one of the things about a lot of these is our artists are trying to keep it relatively simple, both for animation reasons and for the purpose of showing them. So we see this on neocylinders, this big cylinder spinning in space. In practice, it would probably be one of you could have a habitation drum or one or two of them in a giant complex that most of which wasn't spinning or was spinning slower. I think you'd have a lot of things that are connected by tethers. I think you have a lot of stuff magnetically in there too. I think think of a city in which you have a few skyscrapers and a lot more infrastructure. I tend to think a real space settlement, orbital space settlement, looks more like that. There's a few big structures and a lot of other stuff just connected to it, a lot of which is mobile, which leaves, comes in, etc. And so I think that's probably an entire area of logistical nightmares for a future generation yet to come. But if you can just shut, there's no friction with electromagnetism, right? That's one of the things I like about them as launch cannons. You don't have to worry about material limits as much with them. So yes, I think that would be a big factor in a lot of these too, not just relying on classic tensile strength. We time for more? Okay.
So I'm just asking, have you met or are familiar with the late visionary architect, Paulo Soleri? Have you ever been to Arco Sani?
The arcology is original design of memory, so yeah. It's actually a little bit embarrassing. I actually put the wrong photograph up on the one episode that we will mention him in our arcologies episode. I never trust Google in the future of that. So, but yeah, he had some wonderful, interesting designs. Just the whole idea of arcology is pretty cool.
Thank you.
So I saw Larry Niven on your list. I thought, would you like to interview him for one of your shows?
Yeah, we don't usually do interviews on the show, but I would cheerfully break that rule for him.
Okay.
He's been our Book of the Month winner. Well, every time I need an excuse, usually once a year, Asimov, Hyman, or Niven wins it, just because there's so much content from those folks. They're amazing. So.
Oh, and he's a kick too.
Yeah.
He comes up with some pretty humorous
Yeah,
anecdotes.
so many of the megastructures, a lot of ones we had to skip too, unfortunately today, come from Niven's work. But yeah, some of them have episodes. I will recommend you guys those because you see the animations at your leisure then.
Do you have time for another one?
All right, sure.
So humans are obviously pretty fragile. We only like certain temperature ranges, certain atmospheric environments. In the future, when colonizing space, what do you think the trade-off is going to look like between engineering habitats that fit baseline humans versus people modifying themselves to survive in environments that might be more economical?
That's the terraforming versus bioforming issue, is to say, as we've moved out to different climates, you can modify yourself to your climate, you can modify the climate to you, or you can do a little bit of both. Traditionally, we've tended to do a little bit of both. And I think that you'd see, well, you have some people who absolutely want to modify the environment completely to them. And that's one thing I love about megastructures is you can tailor it to whatever you want, which might not be orth normal. It might be weird. You might decide you want to do an MC Escher-like setup if you can, and you could probably use some really strange interiors on these things. But I do think that you would always see a lot of focus on trying to change the environment to be around you, especially because you're not just changing it to humans, you're changing it to our whole ecosystem. We don't really know how well bees and other pollinators are going to do in weird magnetic fields or weird gravity. They're going to have to become masters at ecology to get into space. I see people say, well, we can just use this plant up and move to another one. Nope. There's no circumstance where you ever would not be able to terraform Earth, even if you nuke this thing till it glows, where it wouldn't be easier to terraform Earth again than it would be to colonize another planet, even ignoring that you don't have any infrastructure there to do it. If you want to be good at terraforming other planets or building megastructures for habitation, you must become a master of biology and ecology, not just physics and engineering.
So we have two questions from the online audience just before we wrap up. And thanks to Sindri for helping us moderate the chat again, as always. So Ronald Decker wants to know if a Nickel Dyson beam infrastructure cannot be distinguished from a Dyson swarm, then wouldn't watching a Dyson swarm being built a potential threat to a civilization watching it be built?
Yeah. There's a lot of things you can do with a classic Dyson swarm. And the thing is, it's not really, you can probably purpose build one to be really good at one task, but think of every one of them as a Matryoshka brain in part, as a Shikata thruster, be able to move a star in part, as a giant weapons platform in part, or a ship drive in part. And if you start seeing people building a Dyson swarm, you probably want to say hello to them. You really don't want to check their intentions, because you remember that there's a time lag on this thing. Once they get it done, they can fire it, and that might be 1,000 years ago. You'll only know when it fires because the beam's traveling at light speed, and there are actually worse things you can do than send a beam at people too. But with one of those, which we'll skip for now, relativistic kill missiles, we'll see them in the episode on June 9th. But always good to open relations with anybody who you see has a lot of muscle.
And the last question is from channel regular Albert Jackinson. Good afternoon, Isaac. This was a great show today. How would programmable or smart matter change or generally impact architecture?
Wow, it depends on how small to a programmable it is. We have a concept called a catum. It's kind of like the basic atom of something clay base that you might build small metal or flexible buildings out of. And those don't have to be a single type any more than atoms are. But there's always going to be a cost in moving them, keeping them together. They're always going to be weaker than any material that's really based on straight atomic bonds. But you can still make it really strong. Like a graphene cadmium is probably strong enough that you could build skyscrapers out of the stuff flexibly. So I actually have no idea. Good question. There's so much room on that one. If you can move around, you can change the rooms at whim. I think that you would see probably a lot of multi-purpose rooms, but something we've already seen that. It's like very similar, like if you have a lot more in virtual space. When you have a lot more augmented reality or virtual reality that people tend to spend a lot of their time in, the shifts that are one of those ones where I can imagine a few possibilities, but I bet I'm going to be guessing about as accurate as I would like the existence of the small phone if I was talking to Jules Verne a century ago. So just very fascinating ones of that.
It's ironic to say that the opening chapter of Machine Stops is a room that's all configured like that.
So
I'll get on, Mike. The opening chapter of The Machine Stops, written in 1905, is a room that's all reconfigured like that, where you touch something and it turns into a bed or whatever.
It makes me think those cities made of it, zoning. Imagine zoning inside a city that was made out of smart metal. What can you allow to change the building into? Anyway, yes, that's smart cities. I think that we'll go ahead and sign out there again today. Thank you to all of our audience here at the International Space Development Conference.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you to the National Space Society for hosting us. And as usual, audience, thanks for tuning in. And we will see you Thursday. And have a great week.
Excellent. Thank you.